With next generation right around the corner, I thought it would be fun to go back and take a look at some games that maybe should be revived for next generation. And for this week, I wanted to take a deep look at some old forgotten PlayStation IP that Sony should think about bringing back for the PlayStation 5. PlayStation owns a ton of IP that could easily be revived for modern gamers. So here's a list of the top 10 games Sony should revive for the PlayStation 5. Of course, we still want new IP as well, but even if they brought back just a few of these old games, that still makes a lot of fans happy. With that said though, I did choose IP that Sony owns specifically, and of course this is only my opinion, but with a subject like this, I would love to hear what games you think PlayStation should bring back as well for next generation. Anyways though, let's get right into the list. At number 10, I have Fat Princess, the humorous PlayStation 3 capture the flag multiplayer game. The thing is, Sony excels when it comes to single-player story-driven games, but they could really improve when it comes to multiplayer games that's just simply about fun, and that is exactly what Fat Princess was. It was a clever spin on the classic capture the flag game mode, but instead of a flag, you had to rescue the princess and bring her back to your own castle. The catch was, the enemy team can feed her a ton of cake, making her heavier and heavier, which of course makes it harder to carry her back to your own base. That was only a part of the fun though, because you also had several different classes and which had their own unique abilities. So yeah, you did have to coordinate with your team a lot in order to win, but I absolutely loved this game on the PlayStation 3. It was a blast to play, and I think that they could improve it so much more over the original game. Fat Princess may not be a system seller or anything like that, but could still be a great addition for the PlayStation 5 library. Resistance was yet another great PlayStation 3 title developed by the now PlayStation first-party studio, Insomniac Games. And just like any Insomniac game, it was a ton of fun using plenty of gadgets and cleverly made weapons. In a way, it could be said that this was a first-person Ratchet & Clank, but the thing I remember the most about the Resistance franchise was its world and its story. It was actually one of the better single-player sci-fi shooters for the PlayStation 3, and for that matter, it had a decent multiplayer aspect to it as well. It really was the world for me though. I mean, I still think that the Chimera in Resistance is some of the best designed sci-fi creatures in video games, and it really absorbed me into the world. Resistance may not have been that Halo killer that Sony was searching for at the time, but I don't think it ever really had to be. It was a great game in its own right, and I would love to see what they could do with the world on the PlayStation 5. LittleBigPlanet hands down is one of the most charming and one of the cutest games that I have ever seen. I can't imagine anybody not loving Sackboy, but LittleBigPlanet is so much more than just that. It's a fantastic franchise and one of the most memorable 2D platformers of the last couple decades. Sadly though, we have not seen a new LittleBigPlanet since 2014, and even longer since we have seen a LittleBigPlanet game developed by the original developer Media Molecule. With that said, I don't think that Media Molecule necessarily needs to develop a LittleBigPlanet 4. Tarsier Studios did a great job with LittleBigPlanet for the Vita, and I think that proved that the franchise can be outsourced successfully. For that matter, Sumo Digital added in some great new characters for LittleBigPlanet 3, and I think that they could do more with them going forward. LittleBigPlanet though is one of those games that are great for all ages and something that PlayStation will need for the PlayStation 5, so why not bring this amazing franchise back for the PlayStation 5? SOCOM is arguably the best multiplayer franchise that PlayStation owns, and a lot of the old PlayStation community will probably understand why. It was one of the first great online competitive shooters, but unfortunately we have not received a new SOCOM since 2011. Now, the reason for that is probably because Sony did close down the original studio for SOCOM, Zipper Interactive, back in 2012. With that said though, that doesn't mean that they can't outsource the SOCOM IP. Military shooters are big in gaming, but SOCOM is a bit different with its third-person shooting, and it's a little bit more tactical than games like Call of Duty. This could make for a unique experience on PlayStation if they were to bring it back. I don't know if it's just me, but I've always loved kart racing games. However, I've always felt like we just don't get enough of these type of games, or at least good ones. ModNation Racers, though, is actually one of my favorite kart racing games to ever be made. It kind of reminds me of Diddy Kong Racing on the Nintendo 64 and how the weapons work, and then you have that play, create, share mechanic to it. Not only was you able to create your own characters, but you was also able to make your own racing tracks, and it was incredibly easy to do. My only real problem with this game was that it didn't really have enough biomes to play around with. One thing that Mario Kart has always excelled at was giving you super fun and chaotic tracks with plenty of scenery to look at. ModNation Racers, though, unfortunately didn't have that, but I still love the mechanics and how the drifting worked. So if they brought it back and spent a little bit more time on the actual tracks, I think that this could become a big hit for kart racing games on the PlayStation 5. Syphon Filter is a really interesting PlayStation franchise. Sony has made several of these games on the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, and even the PlayStation Portable. And while I don't necessarily think that Syphon Filter is one of Sony's most popular games, some of them were really high quality stealth-based third-person shooters. And that right there is the thing about this franchise and why I want to see Sony reboot it. We really do not get very many big AAA stealth-based games anymore. Metal Gear Solid is pretty much gone now, and Ubisoft for whatever reason has yet to make a new Splinter Cell, so I think Sony could fill in the void here for PlayStation fans. Also, Sony's bread and butter are cinematic story-driven games, and I absolutely do think that Sony could do that with Syphon Filter. To this day, I am shocked that Sony has never really tried to do anything else with The Legend of Dragoon, an old JRPG for the original PlayStation. It came out at a time when Final Fantasy was firing on all cylinders, and while The Legend of Dragoon never reached that mainstream popularity in comparison, it still was a really good JRPG in its own right. And this is something that I think is missing in the PlayStation first-party library. Sony is a big Japanese publisher, so I would be really interested to see what they could do with a big AAA JRPG like this, and what better franchise to use than The Legend of Dragoon. And much like the original, it could take inspiration from some of the more modern Final Fantasy games, so this very well could be an action RPG, though I wouldn't really necessarily mind a turn-based JRPG either, because we don't get enough of those. Truly though, I do think that The Legend of Dragoon is an underrated JRPG, and I would love to see it make a return. The PlayStation 2 currently stands tall as the best-selling home console of all time, and even though it had a ton of great games, there are a select few that really stands out. Sly Cooper being one of said franchises. It had an expertly crafted cast of characters with a ton of humor, solid platforming, and some good stealth-based mechanics to go along with it as well. It was just charming all the way around and good at everything it did. The original trilogy did release on the PlayStation 2, with a fourth coming to the PlayStation 3, but since 2013, Sly Cooper has completely vanished. That's too bad really, because when I think back on it, one thing that made the PlayStation 2 so good was that it had plenty of these family-friendly games that anybody could pick up and enjoy. Sly Cooper was definitely one of those games, and while I like Sony's more mature-rated titles, I think Sony could mix it up a little bit more with a game like Sly Cooper. Demon's Souls is literally the only game that I have ever thought about importing from Japan. I remember seeing gameplay of Demon's Souls for the first time, and it looked stunning. And luckily, I didn't import it because it did eventually release in the West, and obviously we all know how that turned out. The Souls franchise has basically created its own genre, and it all started with the PlayStation 3 exclusive Demon's Souls. The thing is, this was a partnership with Sony and From Software, so making a sequel to Demon's Souls is a little bit more difficult than what you would think. We have seen a lot of Souls-like games from other developers, but none of them does it quite as well as From Software, so I think if there was a sequel, you would have to get From Software on board. With that said though, a remake of Demon's Souls would still suffice. Even though Demon's Souls was an excellent game, it wasn't as big as what Dark Souls is now today, so I think a remake would introduce this game to a lot of new people who didn't play the original. Now there is a rumor that Bluepoint is working on a Demon's Souls remake, so let's hope that's true. And for the record, I would be more than happy with something like Bloodborne as well. And the #1 spot goes to none other than the long-forgotten Naughty Dog franchise, Jak and Daxter. And when I say forgotten, I mean that Sony has forgotten Jak and Daxter, because I can assure you, fans have not. Jak and Daxter was one of the best PlayStation 2 franchises. It released at a time when buddy duos was a big thing, and Jak and Daxter really had it all. It had good platforming, well-made characters with a good sense of humor, an interesting story and world, fun combat, and it had that addictive collectathon aspect to it as well. Sure, there was some flaws with Jak and Daxter. In the first game, Jak was a silent protagonist, and the second one, I wasn't a big fan of the driving mechanics around the city, but overall, the Jak and Daxter franchise truly is one of PlayStation's best IPs, and that is why it is just so frustrating that they have yet to bring it back. They could still explore this world so much more, and I think a lot of the old PlayStation 2 fans would be really excited for a Jak 4. Anyways though, that's it for this episode, but if I didn't mention a game you would like to see return, make sure to let me know in the comments below. With that said though, if you liked the video, don't forget to hit the bell notification and subscribe button for more content just like this. Peace out.